Hey y'all, back at it again with Raw Reflections, where I, Keaton Wyndham, kind of reflect and give you guys an insight on how I, as a conservative Southern Christian, navigate the classroom environment of a more liberal woke program in a more liberal and woke state. So, last week, week four, we talked about anatomy, which I loved. I learned so much. And so this week we are talking about module five or week five, and that covered sexual health and well being. And that seems like so generic and general. Like, what does that even mean? And so that is actually something that we covered in class this week. Um, but as far as the lecture goes, one thing that this class has really taught me, and I guess really more so because it's what my professor has chosen to emphasize, because my professor also works in the Mayo Clinic, um, just how important a person's pelvic floor is, not just for like sexual reasons, but like pain management. And like as you age and some women go into menopause, there can be lots of connections with that, to the point where um, she really stressed, like, as we become sex therapists and sex educators, to try to find someone in our area who is a pelvic floor physical therapist so that we have somebody to refer couples or clients to. And so it was so eye-opening to just sit there and listen to how it was connected to so many things. Um, and I recommend that as well. Like, I definitely am like pro go like deep dive and Google into all the things that have to do with the pelvic floor. Um, but like, it's weird that the lecture was so tame, because I could tell that like the wokeness, the like liberal nature started to really take hold this week. Like, it kind of was starting to like peek its head out like a meerkat. Um, because I can tell that it's only going to get worse. And I was kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop this whole time. And so here we are in module five of seven. Um, a lot of our readings this week had to do with like being polyamorous versus monogamous, transgender issues, abortion and like women's choice rights, and lots of other things. And so the setup of the class, if it's been a while since I've explained it, is that there is a lecture, and then after the lecture there are like 10 to 20 different readings depending on the week and the topic that we're covering. And you don't like you don't have to read all of them necessarily. So at this point that's kind of what I'm doing. Like, I I am not pro polyamory. I am pro life, not pro choice. And so I I don't feel like reading an article is going to sway me, but I also, when I have the choice of whether or not I'm going to expose myself to those kinds of things or not, I'm just not going to do it. There's no reason to, there's no sense in that. The area in which I live and work and plan to serve as a therapist who specializes in sex and sexuality, I mean, my area just does not hold those beliefs in the majority. So I am starting to just put my blinders on and not worry about that kind of thing. Um, so the discussion board this week wanted us to define what we thought sexuality was and kind of tie that into the readings. I'm so sorry, my nose is so itchy. Um, and so I defined sexual health and well being. I think I just said sexuality, but we were supposed to define sexual health and well being. I defined that as like a mental, emotional, uh, physical, and social attitude and positive state about the sexual behavior of yourself and others, which is like which still sounds super general, but here's the thing is I feel like sexual health and well-being and sexuality are terms that like our culture is throwing around so much lately, but if you stop someone and ask a follow-up question of like, yeah, what does that mean exactly? Then they would go, oh, now that you mention it, I can't really like put my finger on a definition. And I found that lots of times when that is the case, it's because that definition depends on the person or depends on the situation. And it really is such an individual descriptor. Nobody has the same idea or status of what makes positive sexual health or positive sexual well being. Because for someone probably more woke than I am, they would say, having the right to have abortions and the morning after pill and um, things like throwing free condoms like candy or something. I don't know, um, but that isn't true for plenty of other people. Um, And so I read something this week. What I actually read it was called "How Implicit Theories of Sexuality Shape Sexual Relationships and Well-Being," and that was really wordy, but it talked about how we have implicit theories about sexuality and how they affect our relationships that we go into, our romantic relationships and our sexual relationships. And so there are two camps. One was called sexual growth belief, and one was called the sexual destiny belief. And I remember writing in my discussion board to my classmates, like, I have never heard this explained so well. Like, this is something I have tried for years to kind of like feel like I confidently and intelligently was speaking on. And so to know that there was research out there to prove this was awesome. So, people normally approach relationships and sex with either the belief that under the sexual growth mindset that sex is something that can be improved upon and you can get better at over time. And so that if there's not sexual chemistry or like it doesn't click and like there aren't fireworks or, whatever kind of magical random term you want to use, um, that through like communication and being open and honest and like both partners like taking steps to improve, that sex can get better over time as the relationship grows closer and more intimate and you and your partner become more physically familiar. The sexual destiny camp sort of is that like more like fate related group, that like there is this one specific person and the way that you know that you have met your match is that it's just woo, sparks and fireworks and all these like mind-blowing things and like it was just off the charts and effortless and blah blah blah. um and obviously you can tell which one that I am more supportive of. um but I I went into uh, our discussion board with my classmates, kind of talking about how I never thought of this, but the church and evangelicals and Christianity really, and also like other religions too. I feel like this concept is applied to most religions that discuss virginity and virtue and things like that. So, like, even cultures that believe in arranged marriages, like, I could make a connection between this theory that I'm about to explain. That, um, that, you need to put an emphasis on getting to know someone and what do you have in common and what are your future goals and do you get along well, like are you friends, like do you have the same moral values, and do you want kids, do you not want kids. Like the church puts so much more emphasis on you know finding a fellow believer and getting to know them deeply and to not add sex into the relationship, and because it is something that can be worked on once you have committed to that person for life, and so it's not something that needs to be worried about when you're dating and you're not sure if they are your forever person. And I bet my classmates hated that I made that connection because, um, and I didn't like point this out. I was just thinking to myself like, oh well, you and I both know what the end result of this research article said, um, but it actually stated that the sexual growth camp uh, ultimately, like over time, um, they had more stable relationships. They had more satisfaction out of those relationships. Um, they had less negative emotions. They were able to form better bonds. Like all of these classic relationship things that I remember, like as someone who grew up in church, I remember hearing all the time. But I always love when like the scientific data matches up with whatever I learned growing up in church, because lots of times it felt like in church they were just saying, do it because we said so, and they weren't really backing it up with anything that I was like, oh, okay, like y'all are showing proof and not just being biased and telling me to do what you say because you say to do it. I always like to understand the reason behind things. Um, and so I loved that. And I also think that that is something really smart to know about another person going into a romantic relationship. I talked about how, like, as a sex or a couples therapist, that might be worth knowing pretty early on in our sessions, because if the partners are mismatched in thinking that and someone is like part of the growth camp and someone's part of the destiny camp, then like one person is sitting here thinking, oh, well, we can work on this. It can get better. Like, we can worry about sex like when we get to marriage. And if it's not super great, we can come up with a game plan and try some new things. Um, and then this sexual destiny person is sitting over here thinking, I can't commit to you if I don't know if we're going to have good sex or not. And um, or they might be thinking, oh, we had sex, it's not great. Like, I really don't think that speaks well for our future. Um, because those two people, that's a really big, like, difference of thought. And that may play a part in how salvageable their relationship is, because it's hard to change somebody's mind when they hold one of those kinds of beliefs. Um, but I will say, like, I do remember being in college and talking to my husband at one point and like expressing a concern. like that. I grew up with the like growth belief, the like sexual growth mindset. Um, and then when I really stopped and thought about it, when my husband and I were very seriously dating, and I just said, I am so nervous about like the concept of marriage and the idea of marriage, and for all these other, various reasons. But then kind of one of the things I just randomly threw out was, like, and I'm really worried that this sex thing is just not going to work out. And like, how do we know? Because if we don't do it before we get married, like, what if it's terrible? And he was just like, don't worry about that, okay? Like, it's not that serious. It Because he didn't know how to respond to it. I didn't know how to respond to it, but it both kind of panicked us for a minute. Um, and so it was nice to have this article. This is actually an article that I plan to save for later, like throw it in my Google Drive so that when I become the real deal and am practicing, I can pull it out and like show couples like there is data to support um, the growth mindset instead of the destiny mindset, so to say. Now that I've rambled, terribly sorry. Um, my current event for this week had to do with how there is a decrease of condom use in younger generations, which is interesting because I have always heard, and even a few weeks back, like in week 1 or week 2, I had seen something that said that the younger generations are more likely to use condoms and contraceptive like compared to older generations. And I guess like the devil is in the details because they are more likely to use contraceptives, but they are less likely to use condoms specifically. And the reason for that is the growth that there has been in other forms of contraceptive, like long-term birth control for women, like implants and IUDs and shots and even the pill. But good Lord, who is still taking the pill these days? That is so unreliable. Um, but so it kind of delved into all of the reasons behind that, and some of them were saying that there was a shift in attitude about condoms. And in my analysis of it, I was like, this doesn't seem like a shift in attitudes. This seems like a backsliding in attitudes, because the article talked about how and it specifically was looking at like kids on a college campus. Oddly enough, they were looking at the college campus of Ole Miss. And I was like, what are y'all doing in Mississippi trying to look at condom use? Heavenly days. Um, no shade to Mississippi, but like a little shade. Full disclosure, a little shade. Um, but the onus of responsibility is really being put back on the female partner. And so men are kind of going back to complaining about condom use because they kind of feel like it's redundant. They're getting offended, like, oh, you don't trust me, because now even if a woman has a form of birth control that is more long term and long lasting, a condom is still always, always appropriate to use if you want to prevent STIs. Um, and so they are getting offended because they're like, oh, don't you think that like I take care of myself and I check, you don't trust me? Like, how dare you imply that I might have something? Or they'll say, oh, well, I don't have one. Do you have one? Oh, well, then I guess we're not using one. Um, and that just reeks of some of the bad behavior that I have read about from previous generations, like my parents' generation. Um, but so it was really interesting to see that part. Also, something I had never thought of, that this article said was a very significant factor, is that the concept of like HIV and AIDS is so far removed from them. And that was wild. Like, my parents were in college in the early 80s, and in the mid 80s, I want to say like 81, 82 to like 85, 86, um, was when my parents were in college. And so I feel like being a 90s kid, I never was directly affected or impacted by HIV and AIDS movement, but I at least know what it is. And like, I know that it, killed lots of famous figures. I grew up knowing that like Magic Johnson had it and Freddie Mercury had it. Um, but this, like, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, no idea, no concept, because to them it's like, that's something that our grandparents had to deal with. That's so not even close to what we're up to. Um, and like, it it made me feel so old, to be honest, that, it felt far removed from me, but I was still informed. Now they're acting like I'm an alien. But in their defense, like, especially if they are a heterosexual person, they're less likely to have to deal with that issue. Not zero, that's not zero, um, but that is a more predominantly homosexual or LGBT issue. Um, but for the gay community, they have come up with things like PrEP, which is medication that men can take to like prevent the contraction of HIV. Um, there are also some antivirals, and I have kind of seen like a campaign going around for it. Um, and I think the campaign was like U equals U, which stands for like undetectable equals untransmittable. And it has something to do with like, if you are taking this antiviral medication and when they draw your blood, the HIV has untraceable levels in your blood work, then that means that it is untransmittable to a partner with unprotected sex. That like concept blows my mind, because it was killing people just like 30 years ago at a breakneck speed. And I say 30 years ago. I know that wasn't the height of it, but I digress. So it was really interesting to like read about the different culture shift. I'm going to have to ask my younger sister like what she knows about like the HIV and AIDS epidemic, because she is 20, about to be 20, I think. She is definitely that Gen Z category, hardcore. She is lousy with the Gen Z. Um okay. And let's see. Sorry, I'm over here gazing at my notes. Um for my assignment this week, I really just had to submit the outline for my topic. The outline and like the slides I had going, or the slides I had prepped for it. Um, I ended up choosing ADHD and its effects on sexual encounters. I really titled it ADHD in bed, but like people don't always or just have sex in bed. Um, so I gave it the subtitle of like effects of ADHD on sexual encounters. Um, and so I just submitted my outline and some of my like first beginning slides um, on that. And so it's not near done. We still got 2 weeks, but baby steps. They just want to make sure that I am working on it. Um, of significance was that work is getting really, really hectic, y'all. So I'm piling up videos because I know I am super behind on posting them on YouTube. So I apologize in advance. My bad. Um, but I also like had a moment of pure panic this week because I was like, shoot. Those like DEI classes that I did 2 of in January, like I know I had 2 in February, and I knew that I had, and I was thinking surely they were gonna send me another reminder email. Where the heck is that reminder email? Have I not been checking my student email account enough? Like, how could I have missed this? Dang. Because, there were like 1 or 2 that I was more interested in, like seeing what they said about, what was it? Sizeism. And there was one about disabilities. And, I am a plus size or large woman, and I work with people I work with people who have disabilities. So I was interested to see how they were kind of going to spin that. Um, but I like so I went and dug into my calendar, and it turns out that like yeah, one of them was like literally the day before. And I was thinking, shoot, I missed it. What? How did this go so wrong? And then I did some more digging, and it looks like they are no longer doing the DEI classes. And I cackled, y'all, because they don't call them DEI classes at this school. It has a totally different acronym, and I'm not going to tell you what it is. But it essentially means DEI. And they have been standing on business, sending email after email all through January and the beginning of February when Trump got elected. And it was so funny because my immediate thought was like, oh, you just thought you were going to slip into obscurity and not tell anybody that these classes were canceled, but you said it with your whole chest that you weren't going to let Trump tell you what to do, and Trump wasn't going to like cancel DEI and this, that, and the other. And so it was funny enough that I actually left my office and went and told my coworker nearby, and then we both cackled. So I am sad that I didn't get to hear what they were going to say about those 2 classes, but boy, they got what they deserved on that. Like, they were being so heinous. I even had a girl in class like refer to the administration and Trump specifically. Like, she was talking to her coworkers, and she used the phrase, and they said, we're going to stand up to fascism, or like, we're not going to give in to fascism. So like, what do you think? And she looked so sincere and concerned, but at the same time, like, that was so bananas for her to look into her camera and say to her fellow classmates that I played it for Taylor. And I was like, I haven't misread this, right? Like, that was wild. And my husband was like, yeah, she's insane for that. And so I am not passing judgment, but my husband is. So that's a pretty short video for this week. I will give the links, link singular, for my current event that I talked to y'all about the decrease in condom use on college campuses and in younger generations. Next week, we will be talking about Module 6 or Week 6 in this class, which was technology and media in sex and sexuality. But until then, this has been Raw Reflections. I hope you like, subscribe, do all the things you need to do, and I will see you for Week 6. Bye, y'all.